Okay, everyone, welcome. Welcome to this Alberta Council on Academic Integrity webinar. Today we are talking about proctoring online exams. And I believe the title that I've been using is Proctoring Online Exams or Experiences from Alberta. So the Alberta Council on Academic Integrity is a group of individuals committed to supporting academic integrity in Alberta. The group formed in 2019, and we aim to get people together in various ways, sometimes face-to-face when campuses are open, sometimes in events like this, to talk about academic integrity and to support best practices and all that kind of thing around post-secondaries and education in Alberta. So you can definitely check out the website there, Alberta Academic Integrity .wordpress.com. Now, today we're going to talk about proctoring online exams, and there's going to be a panel of speakers. Elaine, Eaton. Sarah Eaton is the educational leader in residence and associate professor at University of Calgary. We have Paul Sopcak, who's the coordinator of student conduct, communication standards and values at MacEwan University, and we have Kim Hogarth, who's the Associate Dean of Nursing at Bow Valley College. And I'll be doing my best to moderate the discussion. Of course, this is my very first time doing anything like this, so please bear with me. And my name is Margaret Toye, and I'm an Associate Dean in the School of Community Studies at Bow Valley College. So I know a lot of what's been going on in Kim's world, and so I'm really excited about kind of having this bigger discussion with many other people. So we'll start with the panelists, and then we'll move it into a discussion. So please, you can use the chat bar to put in questions, and then I'll try to watch that and then ask those questions as they come up, or when there's a chance for that. And there were some questions submitted in advance too, so I'll try to get to those too. I have a feeling we're going to have a busy session. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to hand it over to Sarah to begin with her presentation.
Great, thanks so much for the introduction, Margaret, and welcome to everyone who's joining our session today. So what I'm going to do is we'll talk a little bit about proctoring online exams. I put perspectives from Alberta, and I kind of wanted to start by situating my contributions today. So Margaret is also a member of our steering committee for the Alberta Council on Academic Integrity that was founded last year in 2019 after the encouragement and urging of some of our colleagues from Ontario who are here today. So Amanda McKenzie and others held a workshop at our Canadian Symposium on Academic Integrity on how to start a regional network. And we followed in their footsteps, took their advice, and started an Alberta Council. And this is our first webinar as a provincial council. So we're delighted that you're here with us today. And so this work is situated within that context. And also, I convene and facilitate a virtual online community of practice for academic integrity. We call it Integrity Hour. We meet once a week for really is just an hour, and we get together. It's a participant-driven conversation, and people can talk about whatever they want to talk about during the time that we're together. And so some of what I will talk about today is based on the conversations that have happened in Integrity Hour. We've had people, we typically have about a dozen people who show up every week. We have had people from British Columbia through to New Brunswick come and join us. And I will say that during the pandemic, which is when we started Integrity Hour, started it at the end of March, that e-proctoring has become a recurring theme through our Integrity Hour conversations. I'm also an academic integrity scholar and researcher, and I've put forward a manuscript for review to a peer-reviewed journal on e-proctoring. And so some of what I'll talk about today is informed by this early stage research on e-proctoring. And I wanted to situate this and let you know that in case you know other people at the University of Calgary, we do have an e-proctoring project underway at the University of Calgary, but I'm not really at liberty to talk about our institutional process around that. So I'm going to be framing my talks around the other sort of hats that I wear. And so with this Alberta Council on Academic Integrity, I just kind of wanted to give a shout out to some of my colleagues, because even though we were launched last year, we just got a little bit of a shout out from the International Network for Quality Assurance in Higher Education, which is led by the Quality Assurance Group in Australia. And they've highlighted us. I don't even know how they found what we were doing, but nevertheless, this is a little shout out to our little provincial network that got highlighted in this new international report that just came out. So I was pretty happy about that. And then for Integrity Hour, like I said, we meet weekly via Zoom, and like e-proctoring has been this recurring theme of conversation, and I can speak broadly to some of the questions or concerns and also practices that have come up around e-proctoring. Certainly e-proctoring has become more of a point of information and interest during the pandemic. There have also been some problems associated with it. Concerns, for example, around equity and access around technology for students. What can we and can't we do? And then just this week, someone shared an OCUFA, so that's the Ontario Council, I think, of Unions of Faculty Associations. I'm not sure if I have the acronym right, that now faculty associations and faculty unions are starting to take a stand on e-proctoring. And that just came out this week, and a member of Integrity Hour brought that forward to us to talk about during our time this week. And I thought that was very interesting, because I work in a unionized university, faculty members are unionized, and typically when bodies like OCUFA start to take stands on things, then even though we're not in Ontario, then our faculty unions here start to pay attention. So I don't know how or if that will inform the conversations that are going forward. It seems like a lot of schools are in process, thinking about e-proctoring, and that there's a lot of different considerations. And we've also shared some, different anecdotes, an anonymous anecdote that I'm sure isn't restricted to any one university would be, for example, if the software that's used to proctor the students is an artificial intelligence, then it might pick up a second face coming in as an unauthorized body during the exam, and in one case that face was the family pet, and the software picked up a second set of eyes. So some of the complexities seem to be things that we're working through, and not everybody, it seems like, has the answers. In talking with colleagues, it seems like those institutions that had e-proctoring prior to the pandemic are faring better than those who are trying to scramble during the coronavirus crisis to figure out solutions for online exams in particular. And that was just sort of an observation that was made. And the other contribution I can kind of share with this group here, it's that this manuscript that's currently under review, we submitted it to the Journal of Contemporary Education Theory and Research. They had a special issue on COVID-19. And together with a graduate student, I was able to conduct a rapid review. It's kind of like a systematic review, if you're familiar with that methodology. So it's rigorous, but it's condensed into a particular time period. So we conducted a rapid review over about 3 weeks on available literature on e-proctoring software. And we were, I can share with you verbally some of the findings that we had. We ended up being a little bit concerned because there's a lack of empirical evidence, research around e-proctoring software. There's a lot of news stories. There's a lot of anecdotes. There doesn't seem to be a lot of empirical data to allow institutions to make evidence-informed decisions about if they want the software, and if they get a software, what type of software is most appropriate for them. So many of the decisions are being driven, for example, by demos from potential vendors and by what people are sharing anecdotally. And although there's value in that, as a researcher, I am always wanting to follow the data and follow research, and what does research actually say about this? And we were troubled to find a lack of really strong empirical research. There were a few articles, but not much. And when we did look at some credible news sources, what came out as well that called our attention was a lack of any kind of research that has been done about the connections potentially between student mental health and the e-proctoring software. So we know, for example, that stress is normal during exam times and anxiety is normal. We don't know the extent to which e-proctoring software might exacerbate the anxiety conditions. So one of the questions that I have put forward to our steering committee, for example, is what would we do if we had an e-proctoring software where students were proctored using an artificial intelligence, or say an artificial intelligence, those products are a little bit cheaper, or even if it was somebody who was monitoring, what would we do if there was a real-time mental health emergency? That question became a really big sort of confounding question for our group, and we don't have an answer. And our current academic integrity policies, which are new for university, they're just developed in 2019. Before that, we had regulations, make no provisions for anything like e-proctoring. And we know that on our campuses, we've had mental health emergencies during exam times. So what that might look like in online exams is a question we haven't answered yet. And I think it's really important to push those questions, and for schools that have e-proctoring software to consider what might it mean for your students if there's a mental health emergency while they're being proctored in real time. And it could be a low possibility in terms of like, what is the statistical probability of this happening? We don't know. We don't have any data. But even if it's only one student is enough to merit a conversation. So those were some of the things that we put forward in this paper that's under review. It's not available yet. It's still undergoing the review process. But those were some of the initial things that we uncovered as we were examining the available peer-reviewed research, as well as some of the current commentary on the issue. So because we have 3 of us here to talk, I'm going to wrap up there. So Teresa's just asked me a question. What did Sarah say about UFC moving from question marks to policy? In 2019, believe it or not, we got our first academic misconduct policies and procedures. Prior to that, we had regulations. And then from a governance perspective, those are a little bit different. And so, yeah, they took about somewhere about 7 years, I think, to actually develop policy on it, as opposed to calendar regulations. So that was a bit of a shift for our university to kind of bring us into the 21st century. So yes, we moved from regulations to policy. So now we have policies and procedures and practices. So I'm going to wrap up there, and then we can have questions after all of the sessions, I think is how we're going to do it. I'll stop sharing and I'll let the next presenter kind of go ahead.
So go ahead, Paul.
Thank you. Let me just quickly see that I can get these sharing. Let's see. Okay. Start again. Share screen advance. No, don't need that. Okay. Now, as nicely as it worked in our test, I'm afraid you might have to pull up my slides for me.
I can do that.
Thank you. I seem to not want. Perfect. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, I'll just try to go to
the first slide, and then I'll just give you a quick prompt for the next slide. So yeah, so thank you very much for the invitation, Margaret. Thanks, Sarah, for introducing us to the topic and getting the conversation going. I won't reintroduce myself. What I thought I would do is just give a quick overview into some of the issues that have come up, and I'll also mention that the opinions that I'll give today are my own. I am part of a committee at MacEwan University that's looking at whether to adopt a e-proctoring service and which to adopt. So I can share a bit of the experiences there, but it's still ongoing. So I'm not representing MacEwan's perspectives per se. And I also have kind of a double perspective here. The other one is, so some experience testing these, looking at what might work for MacEwan, but I also have 2 daughters at university that went through testing in the winter and are going through testing in spring. So I can see what they're going through from the student side, so I can share some of that information as well. At the end of the slides that I'll share today, there's also some resources, and including some quite new resources that were just published this week, actually, one by Lancaster, who's quite kind of a household name in the area. And maybe I'll just start out before I give that overview by saying that as quickly as these changes have come, and that and the challenges that they presented us with, there is really an opportunity to right now to take stock and kind of re-envision not just what we assess and how we assess students' learning, but also about our learning environments in general. So what I noticed is that faculty members who maybe hadn't given as much thought as they could to how their assessments align with their learning outcomes, and how well their tests and exams actually target the learning outcomes. There's an opportunity here to get people to rethink, and for institutions also to rethink that. Could you change the slide for me, please, Margaret? Okay, so in general, just a quick overview of remote exam proctoring. So, of course, the problem that it's trying to solve is that without face-to-face invigilation, it's difficult to secure the integrity of the exams. So usually they're integrated within the learning management systems, and there's roughly two types of remote proctoring. One is automated or using artificial intelligence. The other one is live remote proctoring, and then there are combinations of the two. Some involve locking down the exam environment on the computer, so including browser print, copy functions, application switching, and so on. Then there's usually a video recording involved of students writing the exam that gets downloaded and made either available to the faculty member who is administering the exam, or also already invigilated by in-person proctors. And there's a huge price difference in whether a proctoring service is only using artificial intelligence or whether there are also live proctors involved. Could you switch to the next slide, please? Okay, so usually live proctoring does all that the automated proctoring does. I just used the example of ProctorU here. What's helpful with the live proctoring is that there's usually an onboarder or a session launcher that helps students through sometimes difficult process of actually getting the system going and ensuring that all the system privileges are given or handed over to the proctoring software. There's also then that multi-factor verification, screen sharing options with a live proctor. And then there's some live test taker environment checks. And we can get to, in the question period, my own experiences of using these proctoring services, that the testing checking the exam environment is an important feature, and it's not always very effective. And then there's some proctoring and live proctor monitoring and flagging and intervention. And can we have the next slide, please? So some of the issues that come up, and Sarah mentioned a couple already, are technological issues, and these are real. So in the Lancaster paper, for example, access to reliable internet, 15% of students in a study mentioned that they had either unreliable or terrible access to internet, which of course, especially in Canada with some of the rural communities that we're serving with the universities, those numbers might even be higher, and that's a real issue. Also, it's not always easy to apply the system settings, the changes to the system settings that the online proctors require. Then there are emotional problems with remote proctoring, increased test anxiety, just a reluctance to have that level of surveillance enter into kind of the private sphere. And that kind of plays into the privacy issue. And so the online proctoring really does introduce some intrusive surveillance technology. And I added some resources in the reference list that talk about the issues of surveillance And one of the points to really consider there, or some of the points to consider, are function creep. So when data is collected, it's not always assured that it's used only for the purposes that it was meant to be used. Then the biases that we introduce into artificial intelligence, racial and gender biases, there's studies on that. And then of course, data leaks and breaches of privacy. And especially face recognition technology today has led to some, authoritarian regimes closing accounts of citizens that live in countries like the US, for example. So absolutely things to consider. Also I have on the list here that test interruptions are flagged, and that can increase anxiety as well. Another one is students can't contact their instructors during the exams, which is often a helpful tool to have for students to reduce anxiety, but also to clarify any ambiguity in the instructions. I put pedagogically questionable there. That might be for further discussion. And then the accessibility and accommodation concerns. So how far away does it move us from the principles of universal design and learning? And then I'll just have a last slide here, and it's just a quotation. I think it's important to keep in mind, Margaret, if you don't mind changing to the last slide. That cheating is a pedagogical issue, not a technological one. There are no easy solutions. So it's really important to consider this from that perspective, and to resist the urge to let convenience and crisis mode decision-making reshape our learning landscape, maybe in a more permanent way than we want to. So I've got further slides, but I can call those up for when we start discussing. Otherwise, I'll just hand it over for the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Go ahead, Kim.
Okay, I will just share my screen here. Okay, are you able to see my slides?
You bet.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm really looking forward to being able to share with you today some of our experiences. These experiences are from my perspective as well, not necessarily entirely BBC. And we've been using both a combination of live NAI and AI proctoring. We've been using Respondus lockdown for many years, and over the last couple of terms, we've been using Respondus lockdown and monitor and a live proctoring service. And so through all of our experiences, we've been collecting some data and sharing some experiences. So I'm hoping that this information today will be helpful for those who are looking to get into utilizing online proctoring services, as well as potentially addressing some of the concerns or issues that multiple institutions may be going through that are currently using these services as well. So, see if I can go to my next slide here. It's not wanting to plot. Here we go. So our current process in our practical nursing program is we tend to use a lot of exams for midterm and final exams in many of our courses. So anything high stakes, we typically have multiple choice and short answer exams. Within our base courses, every course has at least a final and often a midterm. So learners are writing a lot of exams in our program. Going into one of the changes we've made over the last couple of terms is ensuring that all learners are writing the same exam at the same date and time. Prior to that, because we have 4 sections of learners in each of the various courses, so we're looking at about 160 learners, we have had them write their exams on their scheduled class time. So we used to have section 1 would write Monday, section 2 would write Tuesday, and so on. And so there were a lot of issues with academic dishonesty. You know, you would certainly see trends where learners on Monday would have a lower average than the learners on Friday, and so on. And so we made the change recently to move to everyone writing the exam at the same time if they were in that course. When we went to the online proctoring, we felt we were very clear in our first of what the expectations and rules were going to be around writing in that online environment. And what we've learned is that we've had to make adjustments every single term and define things that we wouldn't have thought that we needed to define. Initially, we made the assumption that learners would recognize that the same rules that applied when they wrote on campus would apply off campus. And so we learned really quickly that they didn't necessarily realize that. And so we had to be more specific in our expectations. The other issue we found was that learners really don't read the expectations and rules. And so even though we would have it set up in the online proctoring platform, that they would have to read through those rules and click, yes, I agree that I have read these rules and I will follow them, before they can proceed, they still weren't necessarily reading those rules. So right now we are currently having learners write over 7,200 exams using online proctoring services each term. This term is our first term in using this service in all areas of PN. Prior to this, it was for part of the term last year, and prior to that, it was in our regional programming for the last 6 years that we were using forms of online proctoring. This term alone, we have written 123 letters for academic honesty. And what we found is there's many more that we haven't been able to write just because of the issues with reviewing all of those exams. And I'll get to that here on the next slide. So a lot of the concerns that we've had in our program with the online proctoring is gaps in learners following exam expectations. So as I mentioned before, they're not reading those rules and following those rules. The biggest issues that we ran into is learners reading questions out loud, so they would read all the questions and all the answers, and so we weren't able to tell if they had a recording device, and so we had to assume our exams were being compromised. Or in some cases, there was evidence to suggest that they would read those out loud and somebody else would, a device or something else that they would look to the side, look right, you could see their eyes reading something and then they would write answers. So there's a lot of issues with those kinds of pieces. With both the live proctoring and the combined live and the AI, if learners didn't complete the room scan, they were still able to continue. And so there would sometimes be a flag, sometimes not. Ear pods were a big issue. Sometimes learners would wear their hair down and you would just get a glimpse, and we were able to find several learners that had ear pods in. And so then it begged the question, well, do we have to ask learners to wear their hair up? Like it really snowballs. Screenshots was another issue, especially with some of the live proctoring services that don't offer a lockdown browser. People looking to the side often appearing to read other devices or resources. And then there are a lot of issues with disallowed materials such as smartwatches, other devices, and things like that. Time to review the exams has been a huge issue with both services. We found that the flags are often incorrect. As I believe Sarah indicated before, you know, the AI isn't as accurate as maybe we had hoped or had believed that it would be. So if there's a family picture hanging on the wall, it will flag the entire exam as one large flag because it will detect other people in the room, even though there's not necessarily somebody in the room. Or other times there's somebody who walks through the room and talks to the learner writing the exam, and then there's no flag. So the flags we haven't found have been really reliable. And so what we've ended up having to do is start watching every single exam from start to finish. This was a massive undertaking our admins had to help, and everyone was spending hours upon hours trying to review these exams. And it really isn't feasible or sustainable. And so now we're trying to go back to the drawing board and figure out how can we do this in a way that is equitable, but that we're trying to ensure that we're maintaining the standards and that we're not compromising our exams and that we're being fair in how we are issuing sanctions. And so that's been a huge issue and problem for us. We've had a lot of issues with learners getting into the exams, and although both have practice exams, not all the learners always go into the practice exam, which is one issue. The other issue is that, we initially set our time limits to be very specific. And so what we found is, because when the learner would start the exam, they would have X amount of time to complete that exam. And so if they were delayed in getting in due to technical issues, it would cut down on that time that they were able to write and actually kick them out early. But on the flip side, if they started the exam, half an hour, if your window was half an hour and they started right on that 29th minute, they would then have that full 2 hours and potentially be able to connect with somebody else after. There was lots of issues with instant messaging. Learners could have Teams or Zoom or whichever open, and it wouldn't necessarily flag if learners were being instant messaged. And so again, it was only if you were watching that whole video that you would find it or find that information. The lack of lockdown browser was incredibly difficult with the combination live view that we were using. Learners were able to screenshot, go to Google, all of those things. And unfortunately, we did not find that the live proctors would interrupt as much as we thought that they would. And so that then brought us into the issue of what actually constitutes as a sanction. Where do you draw the line? What are you going to sanction, and what are you going to let go? And that's been a huge challenge for us to try and navigate what that looks like. In terms of learner concerns, learners find this very stressful. We've had a lot of learners that, we have 3 different team members that are there to support the learners to get into their exams and kind of operate the back door in our LMS to be able to extend time or to get them into the Respondus if we can't get them into the live combo version. And so it's a lot of work and a lot of resources to be able to manage it. Access to the required technology has also been a gap, especially because we found some of the different platforms have different requirements or will allow the use of some devices and not the other. One type will allow the use of iPads and tablets where the other one will not. And so learners have found that very difficult as well. The errors in the flags from the AI has been very problematic for us and for learners. The other piece is delayed grades due to reviewing exams. Initially, we were holding all the grades till we reviewed and then determined that to ensure that there was no academic dishonesty that had occurred, and that just wasn't working well. So we are releasing the grades now with the caveat that if there are issues, then we will have to reach out and discuss it at that point. But that caused some certain grief for the learners. The other piece that was difficult was feelings that online proctoring negatively affected their grades. We did a survey with our learners. We didn't have a huge uptake from learners on it. We had just over 110 or 120 learners that had taken part out of all of our PN learners, which in our program we have just over 15 learners. And of those learners, 63% viewed the online proctoring negatively had affected their grades. And we certainly have seen a lot of concerns from learners on just the stress if they can't get in. If there are issues, they're afraid that there'll be sanctions if they do try and reach out and connect. And so it has really been a challenging experience for us. And, you know, working through it has been a big learning curve for our program. So I wanted to be able to share some of these experiences with others and you know, potentially help those that are going through to kind of keep these things in mind as you move forward. So that is all for me. Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to you, Margaret.
Thank you very much, Kim. I'm going to see if I can get my camera too. Yeah, I just wanted to say of the people who signed up for the session, 30 say that their institution is using online proctoring and 22 said that they are not. So I think, I hope that some of these tangible experiences that you shared are beneficial to those who are kind of looking at proctoring and maybe resonate with people who have already been using it. So I just want to check in with Grace McKenna. Grace is from SAIT, and when she registered, we sort of conversed a little bit by email and then by phone. I'm just wondering, Grace, with SAIT having used some online proctoring fairly substantially as well, is there anything that you'd like to share about your experience, positive or negative, or different from Kim's, or similar, or that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I made the mistake of filling in the registration form a little too well, as I understand it, because I had an email and a call within a couple of days asking if I would also like to speak. So no presentation. You'll have to just look at my face for a few minutes, but I promise I'll be brief. Little context, I'm the academic chair at SAIT for part-time studies in the School of Business. So we run evening, weekend, and online courses, although of course I'm speaking today purely on my own experience and for myself, not the institution. We've been using both the live proctoring and the automated AI version of proctoring for 4 or 5 years now. But until COVID-19 resulted in the temporary closure of our on-campus testing center, as well as testing centers across the province and the country, it was an option. And one of the big things that I would say, experiencing a lot of the same things that have come up in the other presentations, but what a difference it makes when that option is taken away, when that, I would suggest, reading through some of the chat, we were more on the side of students were anecdotally telling us that it was reducing exam anxiety because they were more comfortable at home and using their own devices when they were choosing to use ProctorU. But when that choice is taken away and you're now being given this as the default option, you don't have that option to sort of self-select out and say, I am comfortable with the technology, therefore I'm going to use this, or I'm not. I want to be in that live in-person environment. That's my more space that I feel better in. So likewise, we've seen a pretty significant uptick in technical challenges, in incident reports that are flagging the quote suspicious behaviors since it stopped being the opt-in model of it. So now we're in the space of trying to determine what is the appropriate threshold of evidence for moving forward with anything that's been deemed suspicious behavior. When you know that, for example, what you're truly looking at is someone's eyes looking away from the screen. You're not seeing a device. You're not seeing another person. There's no other activity. But this has been flagged as suspicious by this either AI or live proctor. Additionally, something that hadn't come up before is security concerns. Students aren't necessarily comfortable with the idea that they are ticking a box and agreeing to let an AI or a third-party vendor have control of their computer and be viewing them through a webcam. And again, when you could choose that option, you were sort of deciding that you were comfortable with it. But now when we've sort of presented it as the default, that does push students out of that comfort zone. So we've been working with students in all of these cases on a case-by-case basis, but also recognizing that it's summertime and we're in a slightly slower period right now, so that's manageable, but it's not sustainable, and we need more holistic solutions, more frameworks to operate in as we head into the busier fall time. So, all in all, I'm just sort of looking forward to hearing more from people on and the panel on their own experiences, the solutions, the recommendations that I've come up with. I think that we are in that space where we have a little more experience coming into this. So it wasn't entirely new ground. We've been responsive to things that have come up, but looking more to become less reactive and more proactive where we can on the things as they come.
Well, thanks a lot for that, Grace. And as the questions come through, if through your experience, if you've got something to add, please do, along with the panelists. Now I've been monitoring the chat, and mostly people have been kind of asking questions of individuals and getting responses that way. There hasn't been a major broad question posed. So I certainly encourage you now to use the chat function to add in some questions that you have or things that you kind of want the panel or the whole group to discuss. There were some questions submitted in the registration form, and maybe that's the best way to get this going. Here's a fairly simple one. What is the best and most effective way to communicate with students on the seriousness and effectiveness of online proctoring without adding stress, but stressing compliance? Does anybody have the perfect answer to that?
I'm not sure I have a perfect answer, but I will say in some of the conversations we've had on our campus and in Integrity Hour, certainly involving students in consultations, decisions, and communications can be an effective way of getting other students to listen, right? So students will listen to other students, and there have been lots of examples of where universities haven't engaged in a thorough consultation process with their students, where the students have rebelled, taking to social media or their student newspapers in protest. And so it creates it can exacerbate adversarial relationships between the students and the instructors or the students in the administration. So I think that including students as much as possible in the conversations, and as I say that, I'm feeling a little sheepish because we didn't actually have a student as part of our webinar. So with that in mind, I mean, institutionally, we've been pushing a lot for students to be part of it, and then the students themselves can be part of the communication rollout.
Mm-hmm. And one person, Eric, has made the recommendation or the suggestion of do a trial session with no stakes or low stakes. And Kim, I believe you guys did that early on with the students. Is that right?
Yeah, we did do some trial exams, and we also have done some assessments through it was just through Respondus that were, not a lot of, like, we didn't have all the same kind of expectations that we do for the higher stakes assessments. And overall it went well, but we really have found a lot of gaps in the assessment itself, just because what we're finding is the learners, you go in and you look in your LMS and learners are completing those assessments in, under 2 minutes. So it means that they're connecting with one another and they've shared the answers. And so it's not a meaningful assessment, which is the disappointing piece, because at the end of the day, wanting to ensure that those assessments are meaningful and that we're truly able to assess that knowledge and comprehension. And so trying to find different ways of doing that is certainly something we've been looking at. For us, our program is accredited, and being that it's a large program that we run year round, so we have an intake every term, it can be a little bit more challenging to find those assessments with a large number of learners and test some of those things. So we are looking at some of those things as well.
Great. Paul, you've got a comment.
Yeah, I actually have two comments. I'll start with the comment that Eric made about trial sessions and no stakes, low stakes. And there I can just speak from my own experience testing and also helping my daughters get the system set up. It can be very anxiety inducing to have the first time set up. So it took me half an hour just to be able to start the first exam. And I would add to that, not only to make trial sessions available when possible, not all vendors give you that option, but when possible, but also for anybody who's thinking to use e-proctoring, to actually try it themselves first. So try it, see what it actually, how it works for students, and then assign it for students. And then I wanted to add a quick comment about how to effectively communicate with students on this. So I think part of the research that I think we had James Lang mentioned here, and he mentions peer perception. So students think that students think that more students, their peers, cheat than they actually do. That in turn makes them more willing or encourage them more to cheat. So any conversation that addresses the topic will get students to realize, especially if it's a values-based conversation, will get students to realize that many of their peers actually want a learning environment that upholds certain values, that they share values with their students that, coincidentally are these fundamental values of academic integrity, responsibility, trust, fairness, and so on. And another way that's been proven to be effective is to have values-based pledges before exams. And there's research on this. So not just compliance-based, but also values-based pledges. So to have a mix of those. Importance, I think, is just to get students to reflect on and communicate their values regarding academic integrity. That's my comment.
Thanks. Now, there's been two questions that have come up, or comments or questions. Has anyone made proctoring, online proctoring software optional? And there was one that said, has anyone opted out of online proctoring? I think I know answers, but I'll leave it up to the panelists or even other participants to chime in the chat about that.
I noticed that Todd Denham's here from Thompson Rivers University, and I remember when he and his team gave us a webinar at the University of Calgary on e-proctoring, they talked about how they gave students a choice, right? So they could either take the home-based test or they could come to campus. And it was mentioned earlier, I think it was Grace who talked about how having an option really made a lot of difference. And once the option was taken away and all exams were done online, that I think it became mandatory for everyone. And I know that Todd's been a regular at Integrity Hour and has other experience. So maybe I'll just invite him to contribute to the chat or take the mic if he has more to add. But I know in our conversations at the University of Calgary, that's been one of the big questions that's been tossed around, is optional, and optional for whom? Is it optional for students or is it optional for instructors? I mean, we're a large research university, right? And we can have multi-section courses with 10 or 20 sections of the same course running with over 100 students in each lecture. And what kind of equity and access issues does it create if instructors from some sections object to e-proctoring and others are very much in favor of it? And what does that do to the student experience? We haven't solved those questions. And so when we talk about optional, it's is it optional for whom? And what kind of further disparity would it create if it were optional? We haven't got the answers.
Kim or Paul, anything to add there?
No, I completely agree with Sarah on this. We certainly have not. We were looking at trying to move into an optional prior to COVID happening. That was kind of where we were headed. We've been trialing and working with some of the vendors to bring on an online proctoring service so that our rural learners or those who wanted to take courses from different provinces would be able to have that option. Unfortunately, that didn't happen for us because COVID-19 happened, and then everyone was forced to move into the online proctoring. So we never got the opportunity.
Right, and I think that's it exactly. It's optional when it's optional, but in this kind of context, if these exams need to happen in this particular format, then either they're all proctored or they're all open book or whatever. Okay, a second question that came in earlier on was how to deal with potential academic misconduct issues without definite proof. And so I would maybe look to Grace and to Kim and to anybody else about sort of, yeah, like how are you now handling like these issues? Okay, so you've got some video and now you've actually got to deal with addressing whatever happened.
So with us, it's been very challenging. Some things are fairly cut and dry. For example, you know, when we've had learners who have done screenshots or things like that, it shows right up on the screen. Or when you have a learner who has been able to bypass one of the big issues we had when we went through an appeal, and some of the learnings that we had was that learners are able to, through the contract cheating sites, there's lots and lots of directions on how to bypass the online proctoring platforms and how to get around it. And so we actually ran into a situation where a learner had her hands up like this and her mouse was moving and her answers were being clicked and both her hands were in the video. And so it's challenging because it's considered often, and in our appeals, it was considered circumstantial evidence. And so really it's very, very challenging. It's hard because it puts stress on the learners, it puts stress on the faculty, and it really does pit them against one another, and it makes it really hard either way, whatever that looks like. So for us, it's been incredibly challenging.
Yeah, I would agree, Kim. Definitely a challenge. When it's not sort of a clear-cut space, we've been trying to focus where we can more on education. But it certainly does leave open a concern of, are you sort of letting out a notion of what one can sort of get away with in this online proctoring space? So it's definitely been something, you know, I'm actually meeting with some colleagues who are also in this meeting tomorrow to sort of expand that conversation and talk about how we can also create consistency, because you also don't want to leave it up to, you know, any individual academic chair to determine that space, when you could potentially create more consistency and make sure that students have expectations that they can readily understand, you know, regardless of the course that they're teaching or that they're taking and the instructor that's teaching it. So lots to be done.
Yeah, Paul.
Thanks, Margaret. Yeah, actually, Eric already gave the answer that I wanted to give in the chat, that most schools, I think, just based on administrative law, use standard of proof, a balance of probability, not beyond doubt. And then these images or video or whatever evidence you get from the proctoring service is just one piece towards that plays into that balance of probability. So I think for us at MacEwan, the standards to launch an investigation are quite low. Because it also gives an opportunity to speak with students and that learning opportunity, but then the standard to make a decision has to meet that balance of probability, so 50 plus 1% of the evidence. And I'll just quickly throw in there too that we had someone speak at Integrity Hour who actually had to review those videos, and she said it was not a pleasant experience, and it really felt like invading other people's privacy. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Thanks. Actually, Paul, as you were talking, Marg Alford from Mount Royal asked if you could share the article about the benefit of value-based pledges before exams. So I don't know if there's anything else to say about that, but certainly it would be great to share that article too.
Okay, I'll look up what I've shared before, and I'll throw it in there. Give me a moment.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just looking at some of the questions to pose. I'm curious, actually. I believe Eric in the chat. There's been talk, whether from the panelists or from the participants in the chat, about the flag or not accurate. And it looks like, Eric, you said that the flags, Examity is doing really well with kind of reviewing the flags that come up before they release the, I guess, the reports to the instructors. Is that working well? Do you mind telling us a little bit more about that?
Margaret, you cut out there for just a minute. Could you repeat your question?
Sure. I was talking about the flag. So the online proctoring services flag, whatever behaviors are students are not to do, and some of the panelists, I think, have said that some of those flags aren't really very accurate, and there's trouble with that. But Eric, one of the participants here, was saying that he was finding that Examity was actually dealing with that well and kind of taking off the false flags. So I was just asking if he was willing to come in and share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I'll say I don't know firsthand how effective it is, but they have, a lot of these services have different options, and a lot of the issues relate to which options institutions select, right? And there's a tension between student experience and exam security, and every institution that considers remote proctoring, I think, needs to find the right balance and the sweet spot, right? That's consistent with their academic culture. But one of the things that Examity does is they offer 4 different tiers of proctoring. The first tier is simply automated. The second tier is automated, where the instructor or an admin doesn't have to review the recordings immediately, but rather one of the Examity experts marks up the videos and just highlights the flags, which eliminates many of the false flags and makes it easier for the instructor to focus on the important issues, not like someone's cat jumping on their lap or someone's grandma in a picture behind them setting off a flag. And then they have live proctoring options, right? And that would be tier 3 or 4. So a lot of the advantages and disadvantages and the potential for upsetting students really depends on what service you're using, what options you select, and the sort of support that also students get while their students and instructors get while things are going on. That was a finding of our remote task force at Simon Fraser when we looked at it from a variety of perspectives. And we don't have one, but we recommended that we do a trial of Proctorio and Examity. Actually, Examity and our administrators chose Proctorio. And then we canceled the trial because of the completely outlandish and unreasonable behavior of the CEO, where he started having a social media feud with a UBC student who complained about their service. So we decided that that was wholly inappropriate, and we weren't going to do business with a company like that. And I think it made sense to pull the plug.
Well, that's interesting. Thank you for that anecdote, and thanks for a little bit more information there. And that seems to be, you've mentioned 4 tiers of service, and that's another kind of hurdle in this whole thing that I certainly heard Kim talking about over the last few months or several months is, the cost of these services, you pay more to get more and that kind of thing. And are they actually giving the service that they, at this level that they say that they're going to give, or, and that kind of thing. So,
Margaret, can I chime in there with an additional thought? I mean, this session today was perspectives from Alberta, right? And so I think that context is really important given the provincial government funding situation that all of our institutions are in right now. And a question that has come up from colleagues from me at our institution is with regards to the cost of the services. And they all have different costs depending on the service level, et cetera. I mean, we have 35,000 students, so the cost is probably more than what yours would be at Bow Valley College, for example. And colleagues have come back to me and said, in a time when our university is cutting positions, or not filling people's positions who've retired or through attrition, what's the justification for the cost of such a proctoring software when that could go towards hiring more academic staff or hiring people to support students' learning? So there is sort of an argument that's happening around this cost and how can that be justified for, say, a large institution with a large student body at a time when we've had, you know, I think our university will have had more than $100 million in government cutbacks over 3 years. That's not a question I can tell you that we've solved, but it is one that advocates are posing to us, and it's one that is factoring into our discussions. So we're not there yet, but I will say that, that it's come up a lot.
Yeah, and thank you for that, because absolutely we are, all the post-secondaries are experiencing budget impacts for sure from our government. And there are, you know, there are issues around decisions to, do you charge the learners to do it online or not? And I'll just paraphrase Grace. Grace was telling me that for SATE, when students chose to use the online proctoring service in order to be comfortable at home and not have to come in and all that, they would pay a fee. But now that all online proctoring is, or now that everything is being online proctored, there's no fee for now anyway. And that's the decision that SATE made to sort of to be fair to everybody. And that certainly Bow Valley College hasn't charged learners for that either. So there's lots and lots of implications about cost for the institutions and for the students. I'll pose maybe a big question that came in through the registration, because it is 3 o'clock, so maybe I'll ask this one question, but we can continue talking if people would like. Does online proctoring solve more problems than it causes?
You know, Margaret, I would have to say at this point, I think it causes more issues than solving anything. And it shocks me that I say that, because I was all for trying to get online proctoring just to increase accessibility for learners who, you know, who are balancing multiple tasks in rural and remote areas. But my experiences have certainly made me rethink this as a viable option. And I agree with a lot of the comments that have been going that we do need to find alternate ways of assessing.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's funny because alternate ways of assessing has come up a lot around online proctoring, and with me sort of getting ready for this session, and I kind of wanted to focus it on the online proctoring part itself. But there is definitely, you know, scope to talk about other types of assessments. And I mean, some of the questions that came in, is online proctoring more suited to some disciplines than others? For example, it appears to be harder for a calculus course to design an open book exam than a criminology course. Are institutions shifting to alternative assessments for courses where possible, or holding firm with exams via virtual proctoring? So I'm curious from the panelists and from the participants if you have been making a shift in any way towards that. And I could even speak for myself super briefly in the academic area that I oversee. A lot, it's human services and some social sciences and some humanities. So a lot of the assessments are not exams, but for some of those introduction to sociology, introduction to psychology, those kinds of exams, or those kinds of courses, we have relied on multiple choice exams for a long time. And this has absolutely prompted a review of that. And is that the best way of assessing in general, and never mind in this COVID situation? And so in the fall, those intro to psych and intro to soci are going to have a number of shorter assessments, like a number of assessments throughout the semester that are shorter. And instead of kind of being all multiple choice plus one big paper at the end, take away that big paper, and then they're going to show their learning through videos, through assignments, through reflection, through a group project kind of thing throughout the semester. So anyway, would anybody else like to kind of address that? I know, Paul, you've actually got some slides on that. If I can too.
Sure, thanks, Margaret. Yeah, so I think it's not an either or question. So I think that the issue right now is that there's an urge to quickly, so that just convenience and crisis mode decision making is to quickly go online. And I think that most of the issues can be addressed by actually creatively thinking around effective assessment strategies and really rethinking assessment. And I think this is a real opportunity to do that now and to get faculty members to, to do that rethinking of assessment strategies. But I think there will always be cases where some form of proctoring is necessary. And it's just important to figure out when those cases are, and to not quickly just do a blanket solution and to say, okay, we've always done multiple choice, we're going to continue doing that, here we go, let's just use some e-proctoring. But in some cases, low level, 100 level STEM courses, maybe it might be necessary. I'm not sure. So I don't think it's an either or question, and I don't think we should close the doors to anything, but I think it's really an opportunity to rethink and to not let this crisis mode drive us to kind of brash decisions.
Thanks. Yeah, some of the comments: instructors should have the discretion to decide on how to assess, make exams more applications of, or testing of critical thinking, that kind of thing.
I can chime in a little bit, Margaret, and say during the pandemic, for sure, that we've been thinking a lot about assessment, right, and challenging notions of assessment that have existed for a long time. And those of you who know me know that I work in an education faculty, and so that's my background, is in social sciences and humanities. And my academic integrity educational leader in residence role is situated within our Center for Teaching and Learning. So that tells you immediately sort of how I'm situated philosophically and pedagogically. And through the whole pandemic, I've been listening a lot to my colleagues across campus as they're struggling with different ways of assessing. And through my career, between continuing ed classes and graduate classes, I've taught more than 100 online courses. And at no time have I ever given, say, a timed multiple choice exam. It's just not something I've done. However, as I've been listening to colleagues in other fields, I'm noticing more and more a divide that's starting to happen that I find quite troubling. And the divide is this: between those who are pro alternative assessment and those who are more comfortable with, say, a multiple choice exam. And I'm concerned that we're not listening enough to the different perspectives from different disciplines. And although I am personally an advocate for alternative and creative assessments as much as possible, when I talk with my colleagues in STEM, for example, right, I was talking with a colleague who is teaching a large lecture course with 800 students. And so he's told me, like, I can't have my students do infographics or podcasts. It's like, I have 800 students. What am I supposed to do? And there was no easy answer for that, right? And in puzzling through this, helped me think through how, Eric brought up, yes, different disciplines, and others have brought up different disciplines, but also just capacity, right? What you can do with a class of 35 is not what you can do with a class of 350 or 1,000. And in some disciplines where students will go on to professions where their accreditation is linked to online exams, right? Like in Alberta, I understand nursing, for example, or accounting. If that's going to be part of the student's professional reality, would we be doing them a disservice not to prepare them for that professional reality by not giving them timed online exams as part of their student training? That's not to say I philosophically agree with that. Philosophically, I'm opposed to multiple choice exams. However, I try and temper my philosophical positioning with pragmatic realities that exist, for other disciplines. So I'm cognizant that there needs to be space for productive and constructive dialogue around assessment that isn't an either or.
Okay, that's great. And actually, what you just said is a great segue into, I'm going to invite Sean Law from our neighboring province of Saskatchewan, because he's going to talk a little bit about the perspective from engineering.
Thanks, Margaret. And yeah, Sarah, that was a perfect segue. I am no fan of multiple choice exams either. However, when they are carefully and thoughtfully crafted, I think they do have their place. But when I deal with engineers and talk about academic integrity, especially with online evaluation, the problem we have is this. We have many courses, and I'll just use one example where we have, say, 400 students, And what they're learning to do is solve, say, mechanics problems. It could be electrical circuits problems, whatever. These can take a page or two to solve. So they are compositions. It's the equivalent of writing an essay in English versus, you know, writing a good sentence. They have to do an extended problem-solving exercise. And they can do that in assignments, they can do that in labs, they can do that in tests, but ultimately that's the core skill. Can you work through these involved problems? And so we can't just toss away an exam that looks at a wide range of problems that they have to solve in that way. And multiple choice just isn't going to cut it in that situation. We can push more weight onto assignments, but as I think you know, in the STEM areas, assignment cheating is more prevalent than exam cheating. And so that doesn't help in terms of academic integrity. So I've been putting a lot of effort into this in the last 6 months or so. And if one takes a multi-pronged approach and has 4 or 5 or 6 different techniques that you're using, you can still use the same basic idea of an exam, but you have to really take a multi-pronged approach. And we saw all manner of examples in engineering here in this past term, including some multiple choice where, I mean, some students were suggesting the cheating was up in the 75% range, whereas we caught, I'd say, 3%. And I would bet it was on the order of 10% in the worst case. But that was with a number of defensive strategies in play. And I think collectively they worked, because if you just do one thing, there's no silver bullet that's going to work. You have to try multiple things, and certainly the online proctoring tools that you're discussing today were one of the things we were considering. I think, who is it? The presenter from Bow Valley College, she's convinced me that, yeah, she's convinced me that that is not the way to go now. I was kind of leaning towards online proctoring, and now I'm definitely not thinking that's the way to go. So thank you for that. But there's no simple solution. And yes, Chegg, Eric's pointing out, what are you doing about Chegg and Course Hero? That is what our students will do. They will go to Chegg, which is the rough equivalent of contract essay writers. Chegg, you give them a question of the sort I was describing, they solve it for you, they get it back to you. So Chegg is what we're battling against. And there are techniques that can be used, but again, that has to be multi-pronged. If you just try one thing, it's probably going to fail. You have to have a very coordinated approach if you're going to have any success. And it's complex. I'm going to send something to Sarah after this for her to take a look at, but we did a study that paralleled some of the work in the US looking at cheating in engineering and STEM courses. I haven't published it yet. It's getting stale, but I've got the results, and it might be of interest to this group to see some of the comparisons with the American colleges.
I could chime in, Margaret, and just say, Sean, just to give a shameless plug for the Canadian Perspectives on Academic Integrity Journal, we have some of our editorial board members here, including Amanda McKenzie, and I think Jenny Myron was here. And so this is, if you're looking for a journal, we might have the perfect place for you. I'll just put that out there.
I will send it for your consideration.
That's great. So panelists, I'd like to give you one last opportunity to just share something that you didn't get a chance to in the first round, or that something that you thought of, you know, through the discussion, anything that you'd like to share before we close off here in a few minutes.
I've been watching and listening to everybody. My name is Donna Gray, and I'm a project and change manager at Bow Valley College. And Kim and I have been working very intimately on this proctoring project for the last term, the end of the last term, as well as this particular term. And now we're planning ahead for fall 20 and then into winter. And I loved all the perspectives that everybody has, because this is a beast we are going to have great trouble slaying in so many, because it has so many tentacles that we can't control. my experience that I just wanted to share about talking to all of the vendors, because I was searching worldwide for vendors. They were ranging anywhere from small shops that would just have, you know, the camera and the microphone, and you'd have to review the information yourself, to those larger companies such as ProctorU and Examity that would have the review and report and the live proctor watching everything that you're doing. And sometimes when we're looking at proctoring, and Kim's, you know, to her point that, you know, do you offer it as an extra service offering, which was a part of our business case to begin with, is here's an accessible, flexible process for you to test. And you can do it from the regions if you wish. So just in case you didn't want to drive in and take your exam, the assumption was that yes, the students would be acting appropriately as they would be as if they were in class. We know that that's not the case. When I was talking with these vendors and doing sort of the business requirements review to see what they could tackle and take care of from a mandatory level, a lot of them actually fall very, very short in a lot of ways. They either have one of something, but not of the other. So we're actually looking for the full meal deal. And a lot of companies can't supply that. So that's part of the disappointment, is to be able to find something that's, you know, good, fast, or cheap, but you can usually only pick two. So something has to give, unfortunately, in that full meal deal supply of live proctors, review and report, and, you know, helping out the administrators and the instructors to not have to have the breadth and depth of reviewing and then going out and disciplining as well, which is another business process that has nothing to do with the software. It's a really interesting dynamic that I don't know whether live proctoring can ever satisfy the academic honesty aspect of behavior, but also can the business units be able to support the requirements of reviewing, and then you know, assessing whether or not you're going to discipline these students, and then how are you going to discipline, what are the degrees of it, etc. And I know that I think Sarah was talking about the fact it took 7 years to put together a policy to be able to add online discipline and circumstances that go with it. This is not an overnight sensation. We can't find that magic bullet that quickly, even though vendors say that they've got it. They usually don't, and something suffers, either on the front end or the back end. And it was very difficult to be able to find something that was affordable and fast because of COVID, and easy, you know, good, fast, or cheap. It works in all different businesses, and especially in online proctoring. And it was really difficult to find something that fit everything that we needed, especially the cost. Because Examity and ProctorU, when Kim and I were doing our initial negotiations, they came in at a low price at, like, you know, $28 an exam for 2 to 3 hours. When we went back and negotiated when COVID began, they jacked up the price and added a $5 US stand-up fee. So there's some, you've got to be very, very careful when you're negotiating with these companies. One, when they promise something they don't. So I think it was Paul that was talking about, Paul or Rob was talking about, you know, testing this stuff beforehand to see what that student-facing experience is going to be, so that you get that full value. But on the back end too, we can't forget that soft cost, the amount of time and energy that it takes for staff to go through hundreds and hundreds of exams, and PN had a lot of exams, 200 and some a day. How do you even satisfy that need without some extra help?
That's a good question.
That's right.
Margaret, you asked us to kind of chime in and give our wrap-up thoughts here, right? As we're just getting to the bottom of the hour, and I wanted to thank Donna for sharing her experience. One of the things that struck me, I mean, first of all, I wanted to thank all of you at Bow Valley College, because you've taken the lead in putting this webinar together. So Margaret is our host, and Kim sharing your particular institutional experience with all of those slides and the data. So I wanted to actually extend my thanks to Bow Valley College for taking the lead, not only for the webinar, but also for launching us at, for our first Alberta Council on Academic Integrity website. So thank you. Applause for Bow Valley College. And I feel a great sense of gratitude towards my colleagues in Alberta and beyond, because here we are in this first webinar, and we've got you as a college sharing your experience. We have Paul at principally a teaching university. We've got me at a research university. I think there's tremendous value in post-secondary institutions of all kinds sharing their learning and experiences. And I'm grateful, because every time I engage in one of these conversations, I feel like I learn with and from my colleagues, regardless of job title or institution type. And I'm just so grateful to be part of this community.
Well, thanks a lot, Sarah. You're rather a leader in this community, so thank you for all your help all the time. Paul or Kim, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you also for the invitation, and Sarah for organizing all these things, including Integrity Hour. So thanks very much for facilitating getting those conversations going. And Margaret, thanks for the invitation. And I guess my concluding thoughts are really only, again, I just reiterate that I think we're kind of at a point that's a real, presents a real opportunity to rethink some of the areas of our teaching that have maybe fossilized a bit, and also to rethink to what extent we want to allow kind of the slow creep of surveillance technology into our education. And might be necessary in some instances, but I think it deserves a lot of thought and care. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree with you, Paul and Sarah. I think that it's great that we can come together to collaborate, share our experiences, and help support one another as we go through this journey, one with COVID-19 and two with just pushing higher education to a new level and just further engaging with those learners and delivering education and assessments in a meaningful way. And I've really appreciated the opportunity to share experiences, and as well just to be a part of this group and this committee. It's been very helpful for me. We've experienced quite a few different issues with academic integrity and contract cheating, and just the awareness and to see what others are doing and with policies and research. It's been very helpful, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be a part and to learn from everyone as well. So thank you.
All right, well, thank you, panelists. And so Sarah gave a shameless plug for a journal earlier, and I'm going to make a shameless plug for the next Alberta Council of Academic Integrity webinars. So Nazanin, if you can chime in here, I'll speak slowly to let you unmute your microphone.
Hi everyone, I'm Nazanin. I'm from Northwest College in Edmonton, and a colleague and I, Cheryl Bovair, and some of our Indigenous advisors and elders are putting together a circle conversation on academic integrity, racism, and anti-racism. I'll put in my contact information in Cheryl's as well. The date that we have set is August 24th at 11 o'clock. In order to just make sure that everything flows the way that we need to, we're working through a few technical ideas, I guess you could call it. But we'd love to have as many people who would like to join us be there. And if you're interested, just send us an email and we'll make sure to communicate all the details to you a little before the event. And thank you everyone for today. I'm sorry I crept in a little late today, but it was a wonderful discussion, I have to say. It's so great to be a part of this community. Thank you, everyone.
That's great. Thanks, Nazanin. Now, the information will certainly be on the SI website. It'll go on to the academic integrity listserv that goes out, and certain members of SI will share it around their communities too. So it should be, hopefully, everybody who's participating now will see info for that in multiple ways over the next month. Let me just unshare my screen if I can figure that out. Well, everyone, thank you very much. We've talked for almost an hour and a half, and I really hope that people got some value out of this, maybe even one tidbit that you hadn't thought about before. Sounds like we've changed Sean Ma's mind completely about online proctoring, so that was a big one. So thank you, Sarah, for hosting through Zoom. Thank you, everybody, for coming in. You know, a lot of people are on holidays or whatnot. It's a very sunny day here in Calgary. So see you all on August 24th and at further SI events. Thank you very much.